No. Let's pray. Father, thank you again for the chance to be in your house, to study your wonderful word tonight, Lord, and to just to see what you have for us, Lord. It just absolutely amazes me that your word has been around so long, and yet it's new and fresh every day, and it teaches me something every single day. Thank you for that. So, Father, I pray that you'll be with Butch and I as we lead tonight, be with everyone as they're listening. I pray for open hearts. I pray that everyone is receptive to your word tonight, Lord. Just help us to have a good conversation concerning this topic tonight, and I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. All right. Well, you'll be happy to know, or maybe not, that I didn't bring any Greek notes today.
No, I have.
However, Jeff and I talked about this in his office, and he may have some. So you may get a little Greek tonight too. This gift, or I want to start out with this because I think it's important for us to study this in its proper context. The gift of singleness is what we're going to talk about tonight. But I want to sort of separate this in the sense that all of the other spiritual gifts that we have talked about and other ones that we will talk about coming up are spiritual gifts whose purpose is specifically given to Christians who are called into service of Christ to execute this gift because it serves the church. That's the purpose of a spiritual gift. We've talked about this many, many times. This gift, its intent is not necessarily for me to use this gift in order to serve you as another member of Christ's church. So this one is a little bit different. And in that context, I would not call the gift of singleness in the same breath a spiritual gift as what we talk about all of the others. Does that make sense? It is, however, something that God does gift us with at different periods in our lives. And we'll talk about that. I just wanted to separate this because it really isn't in the same sense as all of the other gifts a spiritual gift. It is, however, a gift that God does give us. And we'll talk about that here momentarily.
Let me also preface this. This singleness, Butch and I, when he come in and I'd ask him, I said, all right, I need to know your view. Is it or is it not? Because I didn't know if he was going to say if it was. I'm going to say, well, we're on opposite sides here because I, too, do not think this is a spiritual gift, okay? And we're going to go through this and show you what we do think it is and why I don't think it is. But it's interesting because right now in our culture, in our society today, marriage is on a serious decline. I mean, a really, really sharp decline. You've got people now, and I'm sorry, I'm not really trying to hurt anybody's feelings, but we have become self-centered. Okay? So therefore, we're not really willing to give of ourselves to someone else. So we become self-centered, which kind of leads to that. We have become pleasure-driven. Amen. We have become experience-oriented, commitment-free. Let's not forget about something that's on every television show that you turn on, or even on radio if you listen to it, and that's pornography in every shape, form, or fashion, okay, which has led a lot of things. You even have things such as government. I don't want to be cruel here.
Say it.
But the government is now actually leading to a sense of people putting off marriage. There's a lot of things that are adding to this, okay? And that's why we're seeing it on this sharp decline, which is one of the reasons why I think that this is kind of an important study for us tonight and to look at it in light of the way Butch was saying it. So I think it's interesting. All right, let's go.
So it's kind of interesting that you bring up the idea that marriage is on a decline because, you know, what's troubling about that is marriage is on the decline, but new births of children is not really declining. And we're seeing more and more of that. We're seeing more and more call for abortion because it's my right to whatever. All of these things that result from typically what would be within the marriage relationship is still happening. It's just that the marriages are going down, and we'll talk about that maybe in a minute too. But here's the thing. This gift as a gift is probably one of the most misunderstood things anyway, because when Paul talks about this in the context, and we're going to read this in context, but when Paul talks about this, he is not saying or even really suggesting that if you are single, you should never marry. That's really not what he intends by what he says. But essentially, and we'll look at that in context here momentarily, but it's also by understanding our position. Okay, so all of us at one time have been single, right? I mean, before we ever got married, we were single. And this, Paul talks about the gift of being single in that context, that period of our lives where we are single up until we're married. For some of us, we get married and stay married until we die. And that's the way it works. That's the way it's supposed to work. That's the way the Bible talks about marriage, is a lifelong commitment. But up until that point where you are married, you are single. And Paul talks about this period in our lives so that we can understand that that period is a gift in the sense that it has a purpose in our lives. And that's the context that I want to talk about. This gift is understanding this is a period in our lives. Now, for some of us, we're married at some point in our lives. We no longer are experiencing this gift of singleness. Now, there's at some point, sometimes other things happen, whether it be divorce or sometimes tragic events where a spouse is lost or whatever the case is. But what happens is there is another period for some of us, a period where singleness happens again. And we experience a different set of blessings, but there is a gift in that singleness as well. And we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight as well. So I want to I mention that only because I think that this gift applies to us all in one way or another. Now, I also want to add one more thing to this conversation as we think about what this gift means, and I'll add that one later on. So, first of all, we'll talk about, I'll just read to you the verse why we call it a gift. It comes in 1 Corinthians 7 and verse 7. It says, "I wish that we were all as I myself." This is Paul writing, by the way. "But each one has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another." So here's the thing. Brother Jeff and I have both mentioned this is really not a spiritual gift in the same sense as all of the other spiritual gifts. And yet, here we have Paul referring to it as a gift. So that's why the author of these lessons included it in this series, is because Paul does refer to it as a gift. And all the spiritual gifts that we study as spiritual gifts because Paul mentions them. And so that's the reason he has added this into this list, is because of this one particular verse and this context that Paul talks about singleness being a gift. Again, it's not a spiritual gift in the same sense as all of the others, but it is a gift. Okay, and I'm not standing here saying that I disagree with what Paul wrote, because that would be dumb. It would also be saying that I don't believe what the Bible says is true, which I do. So I guess what we need to figure out here is, if it is a gift, but it is not in the same context, how is it a gift in each of our lives, and how does it apply to me? Because one thing that I also believe about the Bible is not just that it is entirely true, but everything in it has application to my life personally. So how is that? And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So to paraphrase what Paul's saying, he is basically saying, and this is from the book, it says, "In some ways I wish everyone were single like me, but celibacy is not for everyone." Okay.
Let's back up. Chapter 7 of 1 Corinthians. Let's understand the reason for Paul saying this. Okay. The church there in Corinth had actually written him a letter
Mhm.
Okay, I want you to understand the reason why he goes down is they had actually written him a letter, and there was some teachings going around, false teachings going around, saying that if a person was able to restrain from having any type of sexual relations, then that would make them a holier person. Okay, and that's false teaching. That's not what the Bible says. So that's what led to him to write this letter and go down this path, as he was trying to combat false doctrine to begin with, because they had this wild idea. Oh, well, if we don't marry, if we never touch a woman, or a woman never touches a man, they must be holy. And the longer we go like that, the more holy we get. You can see, can you kind of see where that error had manifested itself in certain cultures and certain, okay, well, that's what he is combating here. That's what led to him writing this.
And incidentally, this verse comes in the context of Paul talking about marriage being okay for people to do. And so if you read the rest of this chapter, that's where he says this. But here's the thing. Paul was a type of man that, well, I guess we'll talk about whether Paul was married or not at this point, but it really is, it's fairly clear. Paul was, at least at one time in his life, married. He had a wife. Whether he lost his wife to and was a widower or some other sort of reason he was not with his wife at all times, but to Paul, being single was beneficial in the way that he was able to present the gospel. He was able to travel the world, not just enjoying himself, but going to many different places where they would throw rocks at him to chase him out of town. But Paul was married.
Yeah, let me go ahead and get this out of the way too, because all this is kind of going to help him, what he's saying here. In verse 8 of 1 Corinthians chapter 7, Paul specifically says, to the unmarried and the widows, I say that it is good for them to remain single. It's interesting, this word unmarried. People always wonder, was Paul married? Wasn't Paul not married? Okay, you got to go back and remember, he was a very zealous Pharisee. He was not a member of the Sanhedrin. Many believe he came to Christ before he made it to the Sanhedrin court, but he was a Pharisee, which means in order to be a Pharisee, he had to strictly adhere to the Pharisaic teachings. One of them was procreation. So therefore, for Paul to have been a Pharisee, he had to have been married at one time. Now, what happened to his wife? Well, we don't know specifically, but he kind of gives us a little bit of an idea of what happens, especially there in verse 8. To the unmarried and the widows, I say it's good for them to be and remain single as I am. Notice one thing. Every time you see the word widows in Scripture, it's always with what other word? Orphans. Widows and orphans. Widows and orphans. Widows. Every time you see them, it's widows and orphans. Why? Well, we're talking about a patriarchal society, not a matriarchal society. Women and children had no rights. They had no rights whatsoever. So it's always widows and orphans. Men, if their wife passed away, they still had rights. So they were not called widowers because that would have been a negative connotation. They had the same rights as a married man still because of the type of society it was. Paul says to the unmarried, I want you to remain as I am, saying that he himself was unmarried, meaning I believe what Paul was telling us right here is I had a wife. My wife has passed on. And what he's writing to here is the unmarried men and the unmarried women. And he doesn't use widowers, he uses unmarried. So I believe this is an allusion to the fact that Paul was married at one time. Okay. But then he goes on to talk about how, because he's not, it's a gift. And that's where we both agreed we need to go with tonight.
So what this all leads to is asking the question, what does Paul mean by this phrase, as I am? Let's take some input. What do you think it would mean? When Paul's saying, as I am, I mean, he's single, but what is he referring to here? Nobody? No guesses? Okay.
They're blown away.
Well, let's think about this in this context. Say it again.
I said not tied down, like doesn't have responsibilities.
Mhm.
That would be one thing.
Dedicated to spreading the gospel.
Other
Okay.
way, yeah.
He gives us a little bit of a clue later on where he says in verse 9, but if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry, for it's better that they marry than to do what? Burn with passion. So when Paul says, as I am, I think one other part, I think you're right. He is talking about freedom and the ability to move around, but I think he's also talking about this ability that Paul had, and this is where the gift part of the singleness, is, I think, really comes from, is Paul's ability to experience the temptations that a normal man would go through. And I think normal women go through the same sets of temptations. This is a little bit, perhaps, a different direction. But obviously, we all, as adults, experience certain temptations towards, the opposite sex. And the reality is that Paul must have experienced some of these things as well, right?
Human nature.
One of the things that's a little bit different, I think, concerning Paul, and this is where I think he's talking about, in his case, even though that temptation existed for him, God gave him the ability, the grace to not succumb to those temptations. Now, here's the thing, and this is where I really want to talk about this gift in the context that God knows from the very beginning what we are going to be tempted with and how we are going to respond to those temptations. Does everybody agree with that? Now, when I think about my children, and one of the things that I really try to do is to prepare them for what they're going to experience later on in their life. Everybody does this as well, right? God, I think, recognizes that we as his children will endure these temptations. Christ himself was tempted in this way, I believe. And clearly, the Bible teaches that he reacted appropriately to that temptation, but I believe that he had to have had these temptations as well, right? I mean, this is just something that's natural for human men to experience, and women too. But God granted Paul a special grace that gave him the ability to withstand this temptation.
Any idea what helped him? He tells us in verse 5.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, he says it's through prayer. That's how he was able to withstand that, because that's the very thing he says. The only thing that should keep us from the act of prayer. I mean, pray without ceasing, right? That's what he tells us to do. But the only thing he says is the sexual relations is the thing that should stop them from praying, so they come together, so there's no temptation, so there's no lack of self-control. So how was he able to do it? He was able to fully devote himself to prayer.
Right. So let's think about this in this context too, because and I want to move out of this idea of singleness and recognize what God actually is doing for these people. Because if this is to apply to me today, it can't be just about being single, because I'm not single today, and most of you are not either. And so how does this, or how can this apply to our lives in some other way as well? Okay, and here's what, as I read this and what God speaks to me, is this reality that Paul, even though he experienced these temptations, God gave him this singleness, this gift, to be able to overcome this gift. Now, Jesus said, if you love me, what? Obey my commands. Now, is it true that sexual activity outside of marriage is not, if you engage in that, you are not being obedient to God? Is that true? So the ability that God gave Paul to overcome this temptation that must have existed in his life is itself a gift. Now, I am not single. I am not single, and because of that, within the context of marriage, something that's true, and this may sound crass, and I don't mean it to, but here's the thing. In the context of marriage, in the marital bedroom, there are great many things that we, as my wife and I, in that context, can say to each other that are perfectly appropriate, and God blesses those conversations. But if I take that same sentence that is okay and appropriate in there and move it outside and say it to some woman that I meet in the grocery store, that would be completely inappropriate, right? We all recognize this as the case, and dangerous.
Brookshire has a reputation around here, doesn't it?
But here's the thing, and the point that I'm making here is God has given us certain parameters and certain ways that we have to live. And if I live as long as these things that I do in the proper context, it's acceptable for me to do them. If I take them out of that context, that's where it's a problem. If I'm a young man growing up, those of you that know teenage boys understand, and you hear it all the time, it is a difficult world that these teenage boys and young women are growing up in to just say no. Because not only is it considered acceptable in their entire peer group, it is almost to the point where it's considered unacceptable for them to not have engaged in these behaviors outside of the context where God blesses them.
Yep.
And because of that, because that's the truth, I think the gift that Paul is talking about here is the ability to remain obedient even when it becomes more and more and more difficult. Not just within those who are married exercising this outside of their marital bounds, which is okay within this boundary, but I think anyone, including young people who are growing up, who are going through this period of singleness in their lives, where it is very difficult to remain obedient. Now, the reason I bring it up and put it in that context is this. For some of us, the temptation for sexual activity outside the confines of marriage is not as difficult of a temptation. But there are, in every life, every one of us that sit here, there are temptations that you face that are entirely difficult for you to remain obedient in. All of us experience these things. Some of you may say them out loud. Some of you think this is something I'm not even going to talk about. And you don't have to. But the truth is we all have these temptations. Right? God gives us the grace, just like he gives Paul the grace in this particular circumstance. This serves to me, and this is how this applies to me, because Paul recognized this, or God recognized this in Paul, and gave him the grace to overcome this very difficult temptation. And I think he does the same for us, because Jesus talks about temptation in this context. He says that we are all going to be tempted, but what's the limit of that temptation? Beyond what you will be able to handle, right? Now, I can't do this in my own strength. I can't say no to sin. Sin is something that, well, I shouldn't say it in that way. It is very difficult for me, just of my own strength, to say no to some of these temptations. But what is possible, Paul talks about in Philippians chapter 4, and I believe I printed that one on here too. He says, I know how to be brought low. I know how to abound in any and every circumstance. I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hungry, abundance and need. That's verse 12. Paul is talking about all of these other different circumstances that aren't exactly the way that I like them to be. Temptations. And in verse 13, what does he say? Somebody read it out loud.
I can do all things with you who strengthens me.
God grants us each the ability to be in the middle of these temptations, whatever they may be. In Paul's case here, it was singleness. In my case, it's something different. In your case, maybe it's something different. Maybe it's something different for each one of us, but all of us have some temptation that really, because here's the reason I know this to be true. Because the Bible says that Satan is prowling this earth, seeking who he may destroy. And guess who he may try to destroy? You and me. He knows what that temptation is for me that really may not mean anything to you, but it's very tough for me to say no to this thing. Satan knows this. He's not a dummy. As a matter of fact, Paul talks in another chapter that in order for us to combat the arrows and the darts that the enemy slings at us, we need to do what? Put on the entire armor of God. We cannot leave ourselves exposed in any way. And Paul, again, in verse 5, says that do not deprive each other except for a time. I'm sorry. And the last half of verse 5, it says, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. That's what I was looking for. The idea that Paul talks about, this grace comes to him, and it gets there because he is a praying man. He doesn't. This isn't something he does on his own. This isn't something that you and I should be trying to do on our own. Our ability to remain obedient through temptation comes from prayer. Because I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, not in my own strength. Make sense? This does apply to all of our lives in some way. Not all of us are single. Not all of us have the same temptations, but all of us have temptations. And all of us have the same Father who, just like I do with my kids, wants me to be successful. And success in a Christian life is measured by how much you look like our Savior. That's success. And if I can remain obedient, then I begin to look more and more like him. That's his goal. That's his desire for me and you. Where do we go?
Anything you want to say about this? That's not.
Those of you that read this in the book, that's not what the book talks about. So I didn't ruin the book for you if you want to read it.
Now, remember, I want to look at what Paul is describing, because he's talking about as me being fully devoted to prayer. Remember, Paul was missionary, right? Covered the known world. Could go into any town, any city, and could hang out in the streets and sew up a few tents and make it. He had no responsibilities outside of his own care that he had to be concerned about, which freed him up to carry on the ministry. So there's 2 or 3 things I can say about this. Does that mean that only single people can serve the Lord in that capacity? No, absolutely not. And let me give you a clear-cut example of that. When we were on the field, and again, I hate to have to use missionary experiences, but that is my life. That's what we did, okay? We had people that would come to the field who could be single. They could go out. They could spend days and days and days out in their singleness with locals and all of this. I couldn't do that, They could, God gave them the ability to do that. I could not have survived on the field single. I needed my help. I needed Teresa. That God gave me her and made us a unit to do this. We always went together. Always would go into a village together. I needed her to bust down doors for me because she doesn't meet a stranger. Okay. But then when it come down to the fine tuning of plans and stuff like this, that's where we work together in this. So were we just as affected together as if we'd have been? to me, we were more effective together than if we were by ourselves. So I'm not saying that we have to be as Paul to be effective in the ministry. Okay, God puts us together to do this as well. So I think that's important for us to know that too many people who are married say, "Well, I can't serve the Lord like that because I got kids to take care of. I got mouths to feed, so I can't really serve the Lord." No, that is not true. Okay, God uses us all in that capacity to serve Him. So I just think it's important that we know that we're not talking about just being single as Paul was here. It did free Paul up to do some stuff, but at the same time, it also, I believe, hindered him to do some stuff that a couple could have done. Okay, so it just happened to be that I believe that Paul was zealous for the Jew against Christ. Lord saved him. Something happened to his wife. He became just as zealous for Christ after that. And he said, "Look, guys, if this is what God has laid on your heart and you can serve Him in this capacity, and He's given you the gift to overcome those temptations, which we all have, then this is how we do it." I think that's basically what he's trying to tell us here.
And I think if you read the rest of chapter 7, and we really don't have time to cover it all tonight, but like I had hoped, one of us got kind of long-winded. But if it wasn't you, if you read chapter 7, read the whole thing and kind of get a context for how Paul is talking about this. He's saying exactly the same thing. Our purpose is about ministry, and Paul's purpose was about ministry, and for him, his ministry benefited from him not having a wife at the time, not for him being single, and that's the context that he put this in. And I think what Brother Jeff says is important too. God grants us this marriage is a gift. Singleness is also a gift. They're not, obviously you can't have both of them together, but marriage is a gift. And part of what marriage does is it brings the helpmate, the helper along beside you. And then together we are to do ministry as well. I think that's an important point.
I think we kind of looked at this in James this past Sunday, didn't we? And all these gifts are good from God, right? We may struggle with understanding the goodness of it, but every gift that God gives us is good. And in this case, it was good for Paul to be single, just like sometimes it's good for us to not need to be married and stuff. So.
And I think one of the things that he brings out in the book that I think I just want to mention in passing for those that may not take the time to read what it says in the book is the idea that he talks about, that it's sometimes difficult for people who are single to look at those and like Paul was in ministry, and they say, well, that might, I'm single and therefore I can do this thing and you can't. That must mean I'm more holy than you. And this is kind of what we opened up with. And then on the other side of the coin, you say, well, marriage is a gift and I'm married and you're single. Then, there's things I can do that you can't do. That must mean I'm better than you. We got to be careful about getting there. Paul is not condoning this reality that, he's not saying it's okay for us to be married and use that as an excuse to not do ministry. He's also not saying it's okay for you to be single and then look down on those who are married. So we have to understand these in this context. That's not what Paul is talking about. What he's saying is ministry. In the case of his ministry, it was benefited from him being married, but he also, you read further in chapter 7, and this is the reason I say this, you read further in chapter 7, he talks about those who are married and what they need to learn how to focus on as well, because that's different than being single. One thing that I want to say is that we have to also understand, and this is part of what Paul kind of refers to here, for those who are single, the most important thing in their life should be what or who? God, Christ. Now I'm going to ask you a different question. For those of us who are married, the number one most important things in our life should be what? Different question, same answer. That, I think, is what's important here in what Paul talks about in this chapter 7. Okay, comments or questions? Man, you guys are quiet tonight.
They are blown away by our wisdom.
I'm just saying. It's not my wisdom.
I will say that
Here we go.
there is kind of a shift as from what you were saying before about temptations facing younger generations. If you take that data combined with the data that marriage as a thing is on the decline, you also have to think about some of the context there. I don't think there's any less of temptation towards immorality or that sort of thing, but notice the message that keeps getting put out there, because I keep thinking about it in the context of my kids. You know, certain generations before my generation, it was about courting, you know, and then it was about dating, and, you know, and all of these sort of things. And then they had that trend towards courtship and, you know, true love waits, and all of these sorts of things came along. But now there's such a focus on, like, well, what's consent and what's not consent, and it almost has put things into a context where even if you were to try to, you know, just say hi, greeting, or what in the past someone might say flirt with someone of the opposite gender, and they don't like you or they're not interested in you, for it to be perceived as evil and bad as far as society and worldly standards. And so I think it's pushing younger generations into more of this same isolation that was brought on by things like the pandemic and lockdowns and that sort of thing, to where there's this isolation of young people, no less the possibility for immorality, as has already been cited earlier, but not to where there's not even good avenues for
Healthy conversation.
Right.
Healthy conversations,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I agree. And
I agree.
again, to me, this is all Satan's tactics. I mean, pushing us away from God's original plan. You go all the way back to the book of Genesis. He tells us what his plan is. And ever since then, he's been trying to push that plan apart and separate it and keep it from the way God intended. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, now they have a new venue now. You know, you can't even, like you said, you can't even talk to anyone without them taking it the wrong way, you know?
Right.
So, yeah, it's difficult. I think that's one of the reasons why we need to do what Paul spent all of his time doing, praying for this next generation, which is another reason why I think we need to spend as much time and effort as we can pouring into these next generations. Goes right back to Vacation Bible School. I don't know where that come from, but hey, you know, anything that has to do with discipling our children is worth any effort we can put into it. So, but yeah, I think we weren't necessarily absolutely disagreeing with the teaching of the book tonight. Just we both kind of felt like that the gift part of this was more of what God gives us for that time versus, you know, it being per se a spiritual gift like everything else that is supposed to be edifying the church and all this. And we kind of were both. I was waiting on him to get here this evening so we could discuss this, and I was glad we were on the same page, because I was like, well, this might be the first time we sit up here and say we're on the opposite side of the fence. Yeah, that was going to be interesting. But thankfully, the Lord worked all that out. All right. No other questions, comments about this? No? Thoroughly confused about singleness, the gift of singleness? This morning, I almost said yes. So I was going to go back on that. All right. Well, let's not... glad everyone could join us tonight. Remember, next Wednesday night, we will not be doing spiritual gift study. We have business meeting that will not be aired. So if you're sitting at home and thinking, well, I'll just watch the business meeting at home. No, you won't. You got to be here. So, and I'd invite you to do that. So hopefully see you guys Sunday. Bye-bye.